Well, greetings, students. I hope you're doing all right. Today, I'd like to talk to you about substances that you should avoid or at least partake of in a very guarded fashion. So, before going into the material, let's take a look at what God's Word has to say. Everything is permissible, but not everything is beneficial. Everything is permissible, but not everything is constructive. In a nutshell, then, we are free to choose from among all of God's creation, but we really have to be careful to choose wisely so that we build up our body rather than tear it down. And this is particularly important in terms of what we put into our bodies, what we eat and drink. So to begin, let's take a look at the results of a very interesting publication, Development of a Rational Scale to Assess the Harm of Drugs of Potential Misuse. And in this study, basically, a group of scientists tried to look objectively at the physical harm and dependency caused by partaking of various substances. And as you can see from the figure, substances are quite legal, uh, but yet have great potential to be harmful, such as tobacco and alcohol. And yet some substances that are either illegal or controlled actually have a relatively low potential for physical harm and dependency. And here's a couple, at least from this chart. Cannabis and ecstasy might be two examples there. And while we may disagree with the particulars of this study, I think it's pretty clear that the relationship between safety, that is dependence and physical harm, and the legality of a drug are two entirely different matters. So I'd like to focus our attention on two of the most commonly partaken substances of potential abuse, namely alcohol and cigarettes. One big difference between these two from the outset is that cigarettes have absolutely no redeeming value health-wise. The toxic effects begin even with a single cigarette and continue in a somewhat linear manner. Now, alcohol, on the other hand, even though at high doses can be bad, well, there's some argument that alcohol can, at least at smaller doses, have some beneficial effects on health, and we'll look at that in more depth in a few minutes. Let's focus our attention on tobacco at first. And I want to start out by telling you there were two pioneering epidemiologists, Duell and Peto, who assembled data in the 50s regarding the relationship between smoking and lung cancer. Prior to their systematic investigation, while it was generally recognized among healthcare professionals that there was some association between smoking and illness, tobacco companies were quick to insist that the association was only coincidental and not causal. And the figure shows that there's a rather striking parallel between cigarette consumption and then lung cancer. You can see this unbelievably rigorous correlation between the two, separated by about 20 years. And it turns out that the 20 years is just about how long it takes to go from smoking cigarettes, to beginning smoking cigarettes, to actually developing overt lung cancer. So these and other more mechanistic studies pretty much sealed the realization that smoking cigarettes, really in any amount, is tantamount to suicide. Now, interestingly enough, studies with alcohol show a similar kind of overall increase in the relative risk or mortality, if you will, versus a number of drinks. However, one unique feature is that we see this kind of an inflection point at about 1 drink per day. Okay, and it shows that there's actually a dip, especially in heart attacks. Now, if you look at a coronary heart disease, you'll see that it goes down and then it begins to go back up with an inflection at about 1 or maybe 2 drinks per day. Now, this kind of a relationship, this kind of dose-response relationship, is generally called the J or U-shaped curve, and it's very common in biology. If you really think about even uh, something as trivial as water or salt, obviously, if you had none, that's a bad thing health-wise, and if you have an excessive amount, that's a bad thing. But there is a kind of a sweet spot where you have the right amount. Now, I know this is somewhat controversial in some people's minds, but I think this data that supports a protective effect, at least cardiovascular-wise, of a drink or two of alcohol a day. I think it's pretty rigorous. In any event, I just want to submit that for your consideration. Now, why that happens, no one really knows. It may be some antioxidant property of alcohol, and it does seem to be across the board for any kind of alcoholic beverage, beer, wine. Or it may just be a reduction in stress that's associated with alcohol. Okay, so here is a comparison of the two compounds that we're looking at, the two potentially noxious materials that we're looking at. And what I'm trying to show by this direct comparison is that we have, for the case of alcohol, we actually have an area, a dose you might say, where we have a beneficial effect. Okay, and notice that this is a total mortality plotted here against number of drinks per day. So you get a small but statistically meaningful reduction in risk. But that's the good. Then the bad is that with increasing doses, the risk of mortality goes up. That's the bad. And then what I'm calling the ugly here is this situation with tobacco and smoking. There's no question that there is almost a one-to-one relationship between increased mortality risk and dose. There's no what we might call threshold effect. So the case of alcohol, again, this is a situation where we have that very characteristic J-shaped curve. Well, that's just a brief overview. What I'd like to ask you to do is review the materials posted for this week's lesson. Take some time, in light of God's Word in particular, to formulate in your own mind, an approach to alcohol, tobacco, and other potentially abused substances. And understand that as healthcare professionals, it's not enough simply to follow what advertisers or governments or your peers tell you. We have to get the facts and act accordingly. In this way, you can be effective in maintaining your own body and giving meaningful, genuine advice to others. Well, that's it for now. God bless and be well, and looking forward to seeing you again.